Hello there. Welcome to the How to Market Your Horse Business podcast. I'm so glad you're joining me here today. As you've likely guessed by now, my name is Denise Alvarez. I am your host, and I am so grateful to get to join you here every week, bring some practical marketing help for your equestrian business. Now, before we dive into today's interview, I want to briefly introduce myself, just in case we are new friends, and then we'll jump in so that you can get to know Stacy Westfall. Now, as I said, my name is Denise, and through my business, Storm Lily Marketing, I get to help dream-chasing horse business owners ditch the marketing overwhelm, get the clarity they've been craving, and grow their business in a way that meets their definition of success. Now, I do this primarily through business coaching and then education, such as this podcast, and I have some online learning resources for you as well. All that I do, friends, is to help you as an equestrian entrepreneur be out in the barn or the arena or behind the camera lens or even behind the computer doing whatever it is that you love to do to serve the equine industry. And so here on the podcast especially, you'll get a mix of step-by-step strategies, essential how-tos, and entrepreneurial mindset shifts that will help you not only see what's possible for your horse business, but I'm also here to guide you through that process so you can make it happen. Now, as I said, today I want to introduce you to Stacy Westfall. Now, every equestrian entrepreneur has a story, but not every story includes a stop on the Ellen Show or maybe a viral bridleless ride that opened doors most business owners dream of. And if you're sitting here thinking, oh, Stacy Westfall, is she the one that was riding bridleless in her wedding dress at the Congress years ago? Yes, that is her. And while that unforgettable moment launched her into a national spotlight, including, as I mentioned, that appearance on The Ellen Show, what is equally and just as, if not more inspiring, is how Stacy has built a lasting horse business in the years since. And even before then, I want you to hear her story because that matters as well. Because that video was actually just about 20 years ago. And a lot has happened in her life and business since then. And as a fellow equestrian entrepreneur, I know that you have so many things that you're going to learn and take away from my conversation with Stacy. Now, I've actually broken it into two parts. And in this first part, you're going to hear how her journey from professional horse trainer to online educator has been a blend of grit and intentional growth and being willing to pivot. With over 30 years, friends, she has much to share, and you're going to hear how her business model has evolved, what that has entailed, what has always been anchored, which is her love for horses and teaching others. And that's just the first part, you guys. That is just part one of my conversation. So next week, stay tuned because in part two, we're going to get really into the marketing strategy and what that has looked like for her. And let me just tell you, she's somebody who's doing it herself. So if you're hearing me talk and you're thinking, yeah, but she has a team. Actually, no. Stacy has done the copywriting on her website. She produces her podcast. There are so many things, friends, that you can learn from a fellow entrepreneur who is in it. All right. So this is going to be so good. I want you to get ready. In this first part, as I said, you're going to meet Stacy. You're going to hear how she built her business while raising a family on the road, how acting quickly and listening closely to your audience is what will help you turn once-in-a-lifetime moments into long-term success and what that's looked like for her. So whether you're just getting started or you're navigating the next chapter in your equine business, Stacy's story is going to inspire you to think big, to act boldly, and to build your business with purpose. So without further ado, friends, I can't wait to introduce you to Stacy Westfall. Here we go. All right, Stacy, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me here today and gifting your time to help my listeners learn more about business and marketing. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I love talking business and marketing, all things business, really, horse business. Yeah.
I love it. Perfect. Then you're in a good place. So before we dive into those things and get into the nuts and bolts of marketing and things that you've learned, what I would love, and I realize that this is a big question, so I will tell you here now, when I ask people this, they're like, wow, that's a lot to cover in one question. But I would love for people to understand your story and background, to know how you went from what you started out doing in terms of horse training and what your history is to what you do now, which is so so much more of an online educator is you don't call yourself that, but when I looked at what you're doing, I would say you're doing a lot of online education, but really helping people understand how to train their horses themselves in a really specific, unique way that's close to the heart of what you do. But tell my listeners a little bit more, pretending they don't know the things that I know about you from what I've read online.
Okay. So to keep it definitely more specific to like the transition between traditional horse trainer to online educator, I think that's where I'd zone in. So we can skip all the part about like becoming a horse trainer, going to college, graduating, getting married, starting the business, doing all that. So, but all that plays a part, and I'm sure it will come up as we go because I could do a whole hour long just about the creative marketing, although I didn't have that phrasing back then that I did when we were starting out, like charging really low price and setting up certain deals. There were all kinds of things because that's just the way my brain wants to work, even before I went to the online. But to me, the transition of when I went from kind of a more you're going to send me the horse, I'm going to train it for 30 days, 60 days, however long you keep it there, going from that business model to what I am now, the pivot point for me would have been in 2003. I did a ride. I I did two. I did my first bridleless ride at the Congress and totally failed, meaning instead of even getting a score, I left out a maneuver, so I literally didn't get a score, which is not even allowed to be placed. So, therefore, that's why I call it like a failure. And but then I turned around. So that was October. And then I turned around and I did the same bridleless ride after having figured out my own emotions about this big groundbreaking thing. Because back then, the bridleless riding, especially without a neck rope and in competition, it wasn't a thing. So when I went to the NRHA Futurity and I did the ride, I won. So then this gets interesting because I win and I go in to get the video, and the video crew that's doing the whole futurity, they say, "We've sold more of your ride than of the winner, than of the events. We've sold all of these." And I was like, "Wow, that's impressive." And I just walk away. And I walk away and people kept coming up to me and they kept saying, "How did you do that? How did you do that?" And you can try to explain that in a 5-minute, 10-minute, 30-minute conversation. Let me tell you, it's not easy to explain something that was so different. So my first thought was, I called is Waltonberry, who was the videographer at the time. I called Barb Waltonberry and I said, "Can we get together next spring and make a video called?" I didn't ask immediately. This was months later. I was like, "Can we get together next spring and record a video?" Because I legit want to answer this question and I can't figure out how to. So we recorded that video and that became my first DVD.
Oh.
And I still didn't realize that this is what marketing and sales is. I was just legitimately trying to
Yeah.
solve the problem of genuinely wanting to answer the question, but also realizing that you've got to see the techniques and the cues, and you've got to see that one moment where right after I say, "Whoa, there's 3 different options, and I can show you the wobble in my horse depending on what I do. And I want you to visually see that, and I want to explain it, and I truly want to answer your question, but I can't figure out how in a 5-minute conversation."
Yeah. That's okay. That's fascinating to me because I did not know that that was the starting point of what that looked like. And then I want people to hear too that I will pull out for a very quick application already is that oftentimes I will meet with people and they'll say, "I want to create this because I think people need it. They just don't know they need it." And the things that typically sell better and are easier to market are the things that people are already asking for. So the fact that they were already asking for it, I would guess that that DVD sold well.
Yeah, it did. I really wish one of these days I'm gonna dig back through, like, all the piles of you save your tax receipts, and you save all that stuff, and try to figure out how many, because back in the day, I just didn't carry that forward. I remember calling Barb at one point and asking, like, how many had sold, because like many businesses, it started out as a DVD, and I would buy it, but I also would have somebody else send it out, and so it becomes, like, the numbers don't all if you don't have the foresight to keep them in a particular order, turns out reordering them years later is harder.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so
Mhm.
just I don't I if I ordered 500 in that batch and I ordered, whatever in that batch, and the numbers keep, and you think you'd be able to add it up, but
Right. It's not exactly science that way. Yeah. Yeah. And so
it's not.
at that point, you were still training horses for outside clients, right? Am I right in terms of the business model at the time? Tell me about the business model at that time, actually.
Yeah, so it was a pretty traditional, straight up horse training, meaning my husband and I both trained. We took in horses. We had a 17 stall barn. Technically, there were 3 kind of temporary overflow stalls and some running sheds. So we kept a barn full of horses with a wait list. I think it's fascinating if you're a trainer. Like, I was always aiming to at least try to hit a ratio of 50% show horses and 50% short-term horses. I would have gone more towards the show horses, but you've got to build a strong clientele. So when we started, it was a lot of 30, 60, 90-day horses, problem, quick fix, whatever it is. But I very quickly, my husband really, he liked showing and he wanted the show horses. And by the time we hit January, February, I was like, which horses feed you over the winter? That would be the show horses, because those people have a 2-year goal where there's nothing wrong with sending your horse out for 30, 60, or 90 days. But on the back end of being the one receiving the money, you better know how to save your money during the summer, because it dries up when winter comes and people are like, unless they're show horses. So it was, I thought, this actually feels good when we're about 50-50 back then.
Okay.
And so that was the business model. And that was straight up the business model. There were lessons that were involved and going to shows and that kind of stuff. What was interesting is that I did that ride, and it did its own version of going viral back then, which means that it made it to magazines and it did different things. Well, places like Equine Affair called and they wanted me to do Fantasia, and Horse Expos called and they wanted me to come there. And thankfully, I had this DVD, and this is another one of those moments. So I have this DVD that I was doing so that I could answer questions. And I'll never forget it. We drove to Alabama. We're horse trainers who, there's not as much margin in horse training because there's so much expense. So yes, it's great. The person sends you the horse, and that's amazing and fun. And you have to feed it and bed it and do all the things. And then they break your buckets and they kick the wall and they break something, and they use up even your arena sand has to be replaced. So there's all these hidden things that you don't think about the first 3 years, but then little things sneak up. So that math was already in my head, and we drove down and went to this expo, and we took the DVDs because that seemed obvious, and we set up the jankiest booth. It was literally probably like a table. If they provided us a tablecloth, then we had a tablecloth, like nothing.
Yeah.
And we sold, and I remember driving back and I was like, literally, my children grew up telling time by, "Mommy, how many more horses until we go in?" They didn't ask how many hours, they asked how many more
Yeah.
horses. They told time by horses. I
Mhm.
did my business math by horses, and I was counting the money on the way home and translating the amount of money in DVD sales to the amount
Mhm.
of horse training, and I was like, "Wait a minute. This is financially more viable."
That's awesome. I love that. And then clearly, I'm going to guess, what was the response from people? Like, were they asking you for more after that? Or kind of tell me about the next phase. So you're like, okay, this is viable. I'm going to lean into this. What do you do? What do you do now?
Yeah, so, going to the expos and things like that, I had been so more focused on, like, showing and that kind of world. Going to the expos, seeing what they're doing, I was like, at first, I was just doing Fantasia, so that meant I had all day to walk around and kind of be introduced to this whole other side of the horse industry, of, like, this educational side. Now, I'd gone to an equine college, but I hadn't really thought much beyond, like, well, I went to a college and there are magazines that, it just didn't I was just headed to the show stuff. And so answering the questions again more in detail, and we had done lessons, and I can't even remember. I think the closest we'd done to clinics at that point had been grouping people who were going to reining shows together and calling it a clinic. But that was where it started to be much more, I could teach people a lot more about this process. And I grew up, my mom was a teacher, my aunt was a teacher, my uncle was a high school principal. teaching is something I've always loved. I had just kept it more into the reining vein and just allowed myself to kind of open that up. And then so 2003 was the bridleless ride. And then 2006 was when I did Road to the Horse, and I was the first woman to win that. And that was where the first, in 2006 when I went there, all we had still was that one DVD.
No way.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm so curious about that. So, and I know Road to the Horse has changed quite a bit over the years. But even when I think about looking now at who they invite and like, they're paying attention to certain things, right? So you did a ride. How does that ride show I can start colts really well? Like, what was that?
You will love this answer because, again, my brain likes to think business. So I remember thinking it was 2005 because I was the first time they did like a mystery contestant. So I knew I knew I'd gotten in. I knew it was me when they were advertising that they were going to have this mystery person.
Okay.
And so I learned that it was me. I had already, we'll rewind, but before I'll just go to this. So 2005, I decide maybe I should do some of that stuff called like marketing or something. And this seems like a good idea because I got this DVD and it seems to be selling. Although, like, remember, keep in mind, I made it because I was just trying to answer that question. And then I went to the expo. I'm like, wow, people like that. And so I'm very lost. I'm the horse trainer brain there. So the first thing I think I need to do is hire a marketing agency. So I call a marketing agency that's in the horse industry. Happens to be that I call the people that are marketing for Road to the Horse.
Oh my
I don't know
goodness.
this. Like, I literally met them at a, restaurant like an hour from here. And so we're sitting there, and to get to know us, they're asking us questions about it. About our like, how are we gonna market these people? Who are they? What do they do? And so we're sitting there, and I'm explaining, I graduated. I knew I wanted to have the kids early. I chose to be stay at home. I love problem horses, colt starting. He loves the showing. I don't like the pressure of showing. If I could just stay at my house and just ride horses and the kids can be there and all that. I just love getting inside. Problem horses and colts to me are kind of a similar vein in like you really get to see their thinking because the colts are like what? I can't believe this is happening. What did you just say? And the problem horses are usually a lot of times problem horses are what I would call outliers, which means they think a little bit out of the box, which is why they're being creative and causing problems for their people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I like doing that kind of stuff. And they're sitting there and they're like, you like colt starting? I'm like, oh, I love it. And I didn't realize that my interview for them had slightly turned into an interview for Road to the Horse. And at some point she goes, well, have you heard of Road to the Horse? I'm like, no. And she's like, well, it's this colt starting thing. And at that point, I'd have to look back, but that was a couple years in. I know Clinton had won it a couple times. It was a couple years
It's
into
still very
it,
new.
but
Yeah.
so it wasn't as known. And they were like, what would you think about doing it? And I was like, I guess I could. And so they told me how to apply. So back then what they said basically, so they knew I had the recognition from the bridleless riding. And they hadn't had a woman, they hadn't invited, I don't know if they'd invited one, but I know I was the first woman to compete. And so they were kind of like, they wanted to do that. And so they had me send in a video. And so I just grabbed the next 2-year-old that came in and set up a tripod and videotaped myself starting this horse and sent it in. And then I just remember I was getting ready to show at the Congress and I had mounted up and I was just about to hand my cell phone over to my husband. And the phone rang and I looked down and I saw that it was Road to the Horse and I answered and they were like, hi, you're in, you're going to be the first woman to compete, but you can't tell anyone. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't have answered the phone. So I dismounted. And so everybody's standing there is like, that's weird. And I have like my mom hold the horse and I walk around and I take my husband out back and I'm like, they just told me I'm in.
Yeah.
Now we have to forget so I can go show this horse and try to focus.
That's lovely. I love that. Okay. So then that, of course, opened up some doors along the way. So tell me about, so at that point, like you started to think differently. Were you thinking kind of like what you said, if I could mostly teach people from home, even though the way it looked then, even now is so different, right? In terms of business model and what's available and what people are familiar with. Because at that time, I'm sure people were still paying to have DVDs sent to them, right? So there wasn't this online space in terms of everybody consuming things online. So it looked very different. Were you looking at any particular business models that inspired you? Or were you just kind of going, I need to just make this my own to fit my family and the way it is right now. And I'm just going to kind of try to maneuver through it that way?
If I could have chosen option B that you just presented, I would have. But the thing that I think you have to keep in mind when anybody is getting started is that you don't know the path. So the most natural thing to do is look for somebody who's doing the path.
Yeah.
So I looked at Clinton Anderson. I mean, he'd won a couple Road to the Horses. He seemed to be doing okay. And so it was looking like that. So the person who made my first DVDs was the person who had made his first DVDs.
Okay.
I just asked him and then called her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was an experience so that so she had experience in, what this was going to be. I had my
Right.
experience of training horses. That became the process of, it's different when you send me your horse, even if you say, I just went online, which you wouldn't have done back then. You would be like, I just bought this horse and here it is. And I just trust you as my guide. I would have started it under saddle. I would have done all the groundwork and started under saddle, but I wouldn't have been necessarily teaching you how to do it. So I contained that full path for myself. So changing into that model was trying to figure out how to convey that same path that I would take, but to convey that path externally. And my first version was DVDs. And then it evolved many more times, moving to the online course that it is now.
And did you do in-person events and clinics a lot? I don't remember what it read.
I did
Okay.
a lot of horse expos. I
Okay.
mean, I did a lot of horse expos, and I think if we look now, there's less horse expos in existence at the moment. I was doing them when they were in their heyday, like 8, 9, 10 in a spring. There was one time period where we left the house homeschooling the kids. So 3 kids in the back seat, 6-horse trailer, employees following us in another vehicle, and we left for basically a 3-month stretch just doing horse expos and clinics. We touched base, like, we went to the East Coast, did that, came back through Ohio, touched down for a minute to restock, and then headed west to go out towards, like, all the stuff out west. So, definitely a lot of hands-on, definitely a lot of face-to-face.
Mhm. Which I think, and I'm gonna ask you in lessons learned, and this may or may not be in there, but I think that that's one of the things that helps you to do so well, right? Is knowing your audience, knowing your people, knowing the questions they were gonna be asking that you could begin to address that in the content, right?
Yeah.
Now, did you have a membership or do
No.
you have a membership? No. Okay. So that was not a model that you followed and did that way. So it was like buy certain products to learn from you or come to these events. You weren't hosting your own clinics, those types of things.
I
That
did
weren't-
eventually, so I was doing the clinics on the road and I was doing some clinics at home, but I'd have to think back, to when we finally probably the funniest thing about that, I think when we did that road tour where we were just gone for so much, we were right on the cusp of, like, that was probably the time period where we had just started to really try to transition out of the horses. Basically, I was burning the candle at both ends,
I
which
was kind of
means
wondering
to
about
me, we
that.
had a full barn of horses,
Yeah.
and then we'd pick up and go teach for a weekend at equine affair and then come home. Now I had some interns so they could keep the horses that were appropriate for them to keep going, they could keep going. And I was in crystal clear communication with the owners. To the point where sometimes owners would keep the horses there and the girls would feed them and turn them out even if they weren't horses they were going to ride. And sometimes I would talk to a client and they would take the horses home for a 2-month period due to our travel. But it was definitely a juggling act of literally burning the candle at both ends. And ironically, it was actually math, which typically I say is not my strong point, but it was actually math that finally tipped me over the edge because despite the fact I was homeschooling the kids and that I was, doing the expos and doing that, what you would call the online version of it, whether it was clinics or expos, and we had the full training barn and we were still showing, one day I was like, I think I keep losing my voice and getting sick for a reason. Maybe we need to slow down a little bit. And then I started doing math, and mathematically, the horses that were in training were by far the lowest. And that sounds like super calculated, which is interesting. But what I meant by that is you have to find the balance between what you can physically do and what's good for the client and what's good for everybody. And so for sure, the first horses to go were the shorter term horses, because and then even the longer term horses, I remember having hard conversations, but they were very real in that, for the customer going, what is your view for the next few years for your horses and what direction do you want to go? And then me honestly answering, am I going to keep that show schedule while I'm building this side of the business? And it was such a beautiful thing because all of those transitions with clients went really well. We're still really great friends. It didn't burn the boats, but it was one of the hardest transitions to make, which also explains why we burned the candle at both ends for so many years. Because it was like we have a good thing, and this also looks like a good thing, and that was really tough.
Yeah. Well, talk to me too, because you have a unique aspect that it was you and your husband, right? So these decisions you make impact his part of the business as well. So did he continue? Like, were these your quote unquote clients? Did you guys have it separated that way? Or, yeah. So if it was like, if you're not showing, he's not showing. Is that what I'm hearing? Like, you're both saying we're going to step back from that arena, or what did that look like?
Since it was over several years, I think we did all of the above.
Yeah.
Because it was but really, if I think about it, it's funny how if you haven't thought about some things for a long time,
Right.
we kept a lot of our, let's say that we had 2 or 3 really core clients. We kept them all the way. As in, one of the horses standing in my pasture, I bought from one of those clients when I moved here, and we've only been in this location for that 8, so let's say I bought her from him, like, 8 years ago, we were still heavily involved. I think it's fascinating that even when we were transitioning out of what you could call a traditional training track, many of those clients valued our relationship so much that we were still connected with them, even if it wasn't in that way. So, for example, my husband essentially ran breeding programs for people. He would help them buy the mare. He would help them pick the stallion. He would, and so even as we were saying, like, our show schedule doesn't look like we're going to go to all that many shows and for what you would like to achieve, they would even say, where should I send it? And you could make a decision. We could help guide their decision based on different trainers have different philosophies and different philosophies fit different types of horses. So even when we weren't in it in the way that you imagine, it's still fascinating to me to see how relational and how intertwined it is all the way through. To this day, like, there's a horse standing in my barn that was still from that original customer from 2003, and I just bought that one, not that many years ago. That's crazy to me.
That's beautiful. I think that speaks volumes to those listening about the value of relationships, right? That you can have all the strategy in the world and all those things, but relationships have to be one of the priorities. Okay, well, tell me real quick, Stacy, what your business looks like now so people can understand that. And then I'd love to talk to you about some specific lessons learned and roadblocks and things that people can learn, take away from your story as well. So tell us right now the state of your business.
Okay. I'll do a quick transition just because it's like when you're asking about the clinics versus the DVDs, and to me, so what happened is I think it was also fascinating that when I was thinking about the same way that I made the DVD, the first one, the bridleless one, where it was like, I need to answer this question for them.
Mm.
When that was how that one started selling. Then what happened was I was teaching people, whether it was at an expo, so they watched my demo. And that's where I really, if I could, when I look back and I think, where did I actually realize marketing versus sales? It was definitely teaching at expos. Because
Mm.
when I would walk in, I mean, because at first I'm like, what am I doing out here? They want me to talk for an hour about what? And then it was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I'm explaining how this one piece, because they make you pick a title, which is actually really handy because then you know what you're focused on. So I go out there and I just freely teach. as clear as I can be using the horses in front of me, answering the questions in front of me. And I do that, not realizing this is marketing. So I'm marketing, and then I'm walking back to my booth, and I'm literally just standing there answering questions. I'm just standing there answering a line of people's questions. And then I had, at this point, I'd made the additional DVDs. So I had groundwork, I had starting young horses, I had, basic body control, I had teaching whoa, I had bridleless riding, I had all these different DVDs, and then I bundled them together. So you could also buy like this bundle of DVDs. And I've had a real great name. It was called The Bundle of DVDs. It was called The Bundle. You do not have to be catchy here. It was like you can buy these individually or in a bundle.
In a bundle.
And so, but what happened really fast is that one of two things would happen. People would come to an expo and they'd see me, but we lived far away, so they'd buy the DVDs so that they could figure it out. So to me, in my mind, that's like they bought a low ticket item, and then maybe they would later convert into somebody who would drive all the way to wherever I lived or wherever I was going into a higher ticket item. Or the person that really I thought about, especially as I was moving things online, was because the very first thing I did was rip all of my DVDs into a digital version and slap them up online. Like, didn't even re-record anything, just was like, if they were good enough over there, let's just have it so they don't have to get mailed. And that was really driven by, okay, now people are consistently coming to clinics, but they're not coming prepared as much as they could, so that I can just do really targeted teaching when they're here. And then when they leave, they don't have anything to support them. So then I started getting much more clear about, okay, yeah, I did film all these DVDs in a short amount of time, but you come and my booth, and I say, the one that you want to start with is this one, and this is why. You're telling me this, start with this one, or buy the whole bundle, totally your choice. It is sales, even though I'm just literally presenting.
Yeah.
You like that I taught about whoa, you like how clear I spoke, here's the DVD on it if you want to be able to review it and take it home.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I morphed that on online, really didn't start to happen until like probably 2000, I'd have to look, 16, 17, 18, somewhere along there, because I had the DVD thing was really still going, which also I think looks at the demographics, right? So I was attracting across the board, but really, if you looked, it was like a lot of 40, 50, 60-year-old women. So the DVD thing didn't feel outdated early to them as it would if you were, anybody younger who's listening going, DVD, what are we talking about? And so, but then when I took it online, I was able to, first, ugly iteration, just slap the outdated dress and everything I'm wearing. The content's good, but the outfit's bad. Put it on there and sell it anyway. And then I started to really grasp how beneficial it was to be able to communicate with people online. And that really opened the door to more of what I do now, which is now I have basically two offers. I have something called the Resourceful Rider program, which you'll love this, even when I recorded everything new. And when I went to, I had my DVDs, I started to record new content that was much more chapter by chapter. I believe in, well, a DVD, you just hit play and however long it is. But like I started doing the online structure of more like 8-minute sections of video, a PDF you could download, a 15-minute talk, like much more navigatable. So you can say, you're going to find that in the steering course in module 3.7. So this is just a function of having answer. I want you to see the whole thing, but the piece you need is in the steering course module 3.7, totally demonstrated out. And so I had that level of clarity from exactly what you said, from answering hundreds of questions face-to-face, of teaching so many people face-to-face. So the two products I have now are the Resourceful Rider, which for a minute was the riding bundle, because shove it all together, just give it a reasonably functional name and let it go. And then and so that one has been there, and then one-on-one. So that's been private coaching. So you could sign up for a 6-month one-on-one. We meet on Zoom. I watch your videos. I give you homework. You do your homework. I have a Slack channel where they can Slack me little messages like, I was giving that a shot and my horse did such and such. Here's a little clip on it. And I go, yeah, okay, great. do this with your hands and legs. And can you see where you didn't mention this other thing that was happening, but this is actually a big deal? And so the one-on-one coaching it's fascinating to do it virtually, because I also offer the people inside of either one of those opportunities to come live. And that has given me the inside track of watching how their brains function differently if I'm coaching you in person. My best students feel like I can tell them what to do and they can do it. And it has a little bit of a feeling, don't take this the wrong way, but it feels a little bit like I'm the one pulling the strings on a puppet. Move your hand, do this, do this, do this. And they can get a lot out of that because they were the puppet. Like they were the executor, but they were doing that. But they don't have the same level of ownership because I'm the one doing it. And that has a huge benefit. But I want you to think about it like that's one part of the way the brain can function. If that same student goes home, does whatever task that I set them to do, they did it 100% doing what they know in that moment, and they had a video running. They send it to me. We meet. We watch the video of them doing that. They're now watching from a different place. They're not in it. They're watching them that was in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just night and day different. The difference between I can fast forward their learning so much is ridiculous.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I had not thought of it from that perspective. So not only does it give you the opportunity to work with a variety of different people, that's a benefit, but then just the benefit of the advanced learning for them and the impact that it has. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my craziest stories was I had a woman who called me. She lived in Alaska, and she filled out a form because I had an application form for the one-on-one, and she'd already been, another marketing tip, she'd already been in my riding bundle with the ugly name. And so she was already seeing me coach and teach inside there. So she already kind of knew some of that stuff, but she signed up for the one-on-one because she had a horse that she'd sent it to trainers. She wasn't that confident cantering it. She's in Alaska, really short riding season, lots of snow, bear, moose, like all kinds of these crazy things. And the first year that I coached her, I was offering month by month. So she did a couple months in the middle of the summer. And then the next year she signed up for the whole 6 months, even though she knew the limitations of basically beginning before her riding season had begun. And she ended up taking that horse from I'm not comfortable cantering to showing it and getting reserve world champion at the Western Dressage World Show in Oklahoma. And I've still to this day never seen her horse live. I met her because she flew here to my house to do an in-person version.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's amazing.
That's craziness right there.
That's so cool. I love that. And let's put another marketing tip in there for people. The power of story. When you tell a story, it brings it home. So I love that. Okay. So cool. I love your journey. I appreciate your honesty about it. And so I'm going to ask you a question, knowing you'll be honest, is that it's not all rainbows and roses for people that are listening, right? Like we hear, this is beautiful. And you were very honest about like when you're burning the candle at both ends. I'm sure that was very difficult. You're raising kids on the road, like many things. So talk to me about, for you, things that were roadblocks through the years that you overcame or, maybe tempted you to say, I don't know that this is really going to work out the way I thought it would. Talk us through some of those things.
It was so interesting because when you had sent me the question to help me a little bit. And the question says, what roadblocks surprised you or tempted you to quit? And my first reaction was like a visceral reaction to like, tempted to quit. What? Tempted to quit. And it was then I was like, wait a minute, that's hysterical that you're like having trouble answering the question. And I was like, oh, it's because I have trained my brain to think about pivots so strongly that although it is the same thing, it feels different to me. So when I'm telling the story about like burning the candle at both ends, it definitely had the tempted to like, it felt torn. I don't know if quit would have been the word, which also we can argue, like I'm stubborn. And I think it's funny because I'll be like, I'm stubborn and people will try to make it like dressed up or something like that. And I'm like, I'm actually totally fine with the fact that I'm stubborn.
Okay.
And so
I don't need to rephrase that. I'm just stubborn.
I will find a way. And they're like,
Yeah.
You're determined. And I'm like, if that fits better with you, but I'm fine with it being stubborn too. And so I remember being interviewed a ton of times after kind of all the stuff with Road to the Horse or the bareback bridleless or all the different things that happen. I remember I'd be interviewed and they'd be like, and what would you do if you couldn't do horses? And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And they're like, what if you couldn't do this anymore? I'm like, what does that mean to you? And they're like, what if you couldn't ride? I'm like, then I would write. And what if you couldn't write? And then finally I'd go, can you tell me exactly how incapacitated I am? Because we can get to this faster. Literally will keep finding a way to be here. So there's this like stubbornness to pivot. So for sure, if anything, like the burning candle at both ends story is more about like not walking in and doing the math or not having in the moment the level of clarity of what about this is working? What about this isn't working? What is making this hard? If anybody had helped me see I'm afraid I'm going to hurt relationships, then I would have been able to see a way forward. Because at the end, even without that clarity, we figured out a way forward without relationships just by being so open and honest with people. It wasn't super hard because they were usually with us. Like our client of horse training people went to Road to the Horse and watched us. This is a super funny side story. Literally, people that had horses with us for years, the DVDs were selling super fast. We didn't have a PO. We didn't have a way to collect anything but cash. And we had no cash register. When I say we really didn't have this set up, I'm not joking. And there was a point where the line was so long, we actually grabbed like 2 or 3 of our like trusted people and we're like, just sell them. Literally just get a DVD, take the cash, put it in your pocket, and we'll figure it out. We have done so many janky, messed up, weird looking things over the years. And I think people nowadays, they don't roll with it and let the ugly be there and then figure it out once you've got enough going on. So it could have been a roadblock that we didn't have a backdrop or a cash register or anything. It could have been a roadblock. But even today, when I have people enroll in something, and let's say that I do a launch or something like that, I know how to import because tech was one of the big things changing over here, like learning all the tech and running all the behind the scenes. Because mathematically, once I had the mathematical breakover from training horses to selling DVDs, I started to be like, maybe I should do more math like that. Well, hiring out, and I'm not against hiring out your marketing, but I love what you offer, which is like hybrids or how to, like there should be levels, just like there's levels in horse training. I think there's levels. I'm like, you can take lessons. That's absolutely valuable. You can do this. It's absolutely valuable. You can also pay for like full-blown horse training. They all have different markets that they serve and different reasons that they serve them. So at one point I was like, well, I could have somebody create my whole online thing, but I'm going to pay them a lot of money, or I could figure it out myself. Well, the figuring it out myself tech side, those could be roadblocks I could just write books about. 160 something hours to to record and edit my first online thing that wasn't just ripping my DVDs. Because to keep my sanity, I had to count it. Because that's a lot of editing. That's physically harder for me to sit at a computer and not end up with a messed up back than it is to ride horses all day. So to figure it out. So, I mean, I still run into roadblocks. It's like, do I know how to run something on Zoom, download all the people that signed up for and gave me their email, clean it up because it refuses to go into ConvertKit cleanly, clean up the spreadsheet so it will import correctly into ConvertKit, tag the people as they're coming in under what they were, and then which tag, do I need tags? What are tags? Why do I even care if I have tags? What is happening in my life? And then import them in. So there's all kinds of times when I look back at doing some of these things in these messy, ugly ways have led me to amazing breakthroughs. So I'm going to circle back to the one. I did something, it sold pretty well, which again is like all like what it's priced in and how many I wanted and all that stuff. It sold pretty well. But instead of doing all the import stuff, which as you may have caught on to in that last little minute, I don't love doing all that stuff. I was like, you know what? I'll just open up ConvertKit, now known as Kit. I'll just open up my email provider and I will just find the person and click the one button that says that they're now enrolled. I didn't have all the other things. I was like, it's not gonna be that long. Doing it that way where I could easily judge myself for taking the long way, the messier way, for not hiring somebody else to do it, whatever you could slap onto that. I'd open up individually each one, and without knowing it, but I caught on pretty fast, now I'm seeing how long they've been on my email list. Now I'm seeing how many emails they've opened. And because I've been stubbornly tagging these things, even though I had no idea why, I'd go down and I'd scroll down and I'd go to tag them. I'm like, darn, they attended my last 3 webinars, and this 4th webinar is the one that they bought on. I wonder if that's true about the next person. If I had imported, I never would have made all those discoveries.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What I want people to hear is mindset. I hope what people are listening to is the fact that the way you have chosen to approach roadblocks is a complete mindset shift from what typically people are doing. And it's keeping them stuck because they see it as a roadblock. And you've completely shifted the mindset from roadblock to opportunity, or if not roadblock to opportunity, at least from roadblock to I will get this dang thing done. And then it eventually brought an opportunity, which is beautiful. And I think that especially in equestrian entrepreneurship, you have to have that. And especially when it comes to tech. Now, some people listening are going to say, look, I mean, I have a client right now. She's like, I don't want to learn Canva. Like, I just want to pay somebody to do it. And so you have freedom as an entrepreneur to decide, like, I don't want to deal with the imports. I'm going to pay a virtual assistant. But the reality is realizing you have the freedom to do it and you get to choose how it affects the rest of what you do. If it becomes a roadblock or if it becomes something like, this is how I'm going to solve that problem. Check it off. I'm not a failure because I didn't want to do it. I'm not a failure because I had to go in. That is 100% mindset. And I know that you are a student of mindset. I get your emails, so I know that you don't know that, or that you realize that. But for those listening, I want them to hear that and understand the hugeness of that and the impact that that can have on them as they build their businesses.
For sure. For sure. And what's interesting is a lot of times when I'm coaching people, whether it's the one-on-one or it's the group or it's meeting up with somebody, it's reminding them that it doesn't get better in a way. Like, in a way, you're always going to be they're just different problems, right? I mean, the problems that I had when horses were breaking buckets and I didn't have the budget, to be able to fix different things because I just had failed to see it versus I have a podcast that has like 330 episodes, and I can remember staying up till 3 a.m. one time, which, I mean, it was like literally 5 minutes before it's usually scheduled to go out because I was wrestling with, I had this specific thing I wanted to do. I was trying to edit together a whole bunch of, it was a Thanksgiving episode, if in case anybody remembers that. And I had hundreds of people call in, and I was trying to make it, and I've got this very artistic side where I want it to be a certain way. And you can't, if you want to do something really unique like that, you can't convey it. Like, literally, it would have taken me 10 times longer to try to convey it. So I'm editing it myself. And it's this dance between how passionate am I about this one episode sounding like that I'm staying up until 3 a.m. And I'd already been working on it for several days. It wasn't like I started at 1 a.m.
Right.
And it was just like, I will get this one out. And some of those, it's not even like they make a wave out there. I think sometimes we think we put that much effort in and it better create 20,000 whatever likes or follows or views or whatever. And it's like, I doubt that one's even one of my higher downloads, but it was mine and I wanted to do it that way. And it is fascinating. The mindset of at what accidentally then trickles out of you because of the way you are approaching things.
All right, friends, I hope you are enjoying getting to know Stacy as much as I did during that interview. Before we say goodbye for today, all right, for our part 1, because I want you to come back for part 2. But before we do, I want to give you some takeaways that I wrote down and that I took away from our conversation. Because while this first part was very much Stacy's story, that's the beauty of it. There's so much we can learn from one another as we listen to each other's stories. And so as you've listened, and sometimes I do call it out in the interview and say, hey, listeners, I want you to hear this. What I want to do is just give you 4 simple takeaways just so far that I have written down. All right. And so if you're a notes person, you can grab this, or of course, you can go to the show notes at any time. So if you go to stormlily.com/175 for episode 175, on there, you're going to get the highlights of this conversation, specifically these takeaways. And then, of course, links to Stacy's website. I've got a link there to the video where, in case you have not watched her riding bridleless in her wedding gown, you can see that. And I've also got a link to her interview on the Ellen Show. And so that's all going to be on the show notes. All right. So that being said, you can get that there. But here are the 4 takeaways I want you to think about as you apply what has been Stacy's experience to your own building journey. Number 1, pay attention to what people ask you. What you heard her say is that people were asking her questions, and that was the real motivator for what started to happen in terms of the appearances and the videos and the DVDs and things like that. So for you and your business, what questions are people asking you? Whether you're a trainer, a barn owner, a clinician, a product maker, whatever it is that you're doing in the equine industry, the questions that people ask you are full of clues about what your audience needs most. So instead of trying to guess what to offer, I want you to listen to what people are asking you. All right, takeaway number 2 is to get clear on who you help and how you do it. And you have heard me talk about this before on the podcast. You cannot market to everyone. And Stacy, as you listen to her story, you will hear that the people she's working with are unique to her and unique to her style and her method and philosophy about horsemanship. And she's not working with anyone and everyone. But when people go to her website and see what she's doing, the right people know what she's doing and if they're the one for her. And the same is true for you and your equine business. I want you to really focus on your audience again and get to know who you are helping, who you're best suited to serve. And that needs to guide your offers and your messaging. All right, number 3, friend, I want you to be willing to evolve. Now, you heard Stacy talk about this, and we'll talk about it more in the next episode as well. But the way her business looks now is not what it looked like 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, because she has been willing to evolve and to pivot and shift based on a variety of factors, 100% based on technology, based on her audience and their needs, based on her family situation, based on their goals for their family and their business. All of those things have helped her to be willing to evolve and required her to, frankly. And the same is true in your equestrian business. What worked at the start of your business may not serve you in your current season, and that is okay. So if you will be willing to evolve, you will be surprised at what's possible. Our last takeaway from this conversation with Stacy is that you should give yourself permission to build a business that meets your definition of success. I love hearing from Stacy how she shaped her business to support the lifestyle that they wanted with their family and the horse business that she and her husband were creating together. And they had a clear definition of what success looked like for them. So did she share that she was learning from what others were doing? Absolutely. But she didn't try to emulate 100% what others were doing because she had a different filter and version of success that she's been after. And so again, in your business, friends, I want to encourage you to do that. Build a business that meets your definition of success. Rather than chasing every opportunity or trying to keep up with industry trends, I want to encourage you to lean into your strengths, your rhythms, your unique approach, and your unique version of success for your equine business and your family. All right, friends, those are my big takeaways that I had, but I'm curious if you had others. So I would love to know. Feel free to send me a message. You can email me anytime, denise@stormlily.com, or you can send me a note on social media. Instagram and Facebook is where I'm hanging out mostly as Storm Lily Marketing. So find me there. Let me know what you enjoyed most about Stacy's story and what you learned that you're going to apply in your equine business. And then stay tuned because next week we are going to dive into more of the marketing strategy and mindset that Stacy has had that have helped her grow her business. You'll hear about how she did have people helping her and how she's been doing most of it all on her own, why, and how that works for her. And one of the things I'm going to tell you now is you're going to get permission. All right. For those of you who have felt overwhelmed, felt like you had to do everything all the time, Stacy's going to give you permission to do the things that are going to be, most suited for you and your season and stage of business. All right. Okay. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining me here, friends. And I'll see you again next week. Have an amazing day.